get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Taylor McMaster of Dot & Company, and you can find him at dotandcompany.co. Taylor, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. And since this is part of the Top Agency series, I had Jason Swank. We both know Jason Swank. I had him on twice. Actually, once he talked about how he built up his agency to 8 figures and sold it. Second time was how one of the companies he was working with has been buying up agencies. And so talking about the valuation and the agency space in general, that was an interesting one. We also have a mutual friend, Ian Garlick of videocasestory.com. Ian, that was a really interesting episode. And he talked about, he really comes from an entrepreneurial family. His dad was an entrepreneur. I don't know if he told you this story, Taylor, but his dad owned a lot of different types of businesses. One was a restaurant and it had dolphins in it. Okay. And that would be weird or interesting, maybe weird if it was in Orlando, but at the time that restaurant was in Wisconsin and had live dolphins in the restaurant. So just interesting stories and got the creative juices flowing. Another one was Kevin Hurrigan. Kevin Hurrigan runs Spinutech. He's an agency since 1995. So we talked about the landscape and evolution of the business, of the internet, and of agency life at that time too. So those are really interesting. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. And we do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So kind of what Taylor does for account management. We're like kind of like the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they can create amazing content and amazing relationships, but most importantly, run their business. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships, and I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. Taylor has a podcast. You should check it out. If you have questions, you go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Taylor McMaster. She's the founder of Dot & Company, where she and her team help digital marketing agencies keep their clients happy. How do they help keep their clients happy? They have full service client account management services. So really, Taylor leads a team of client account managers at Dot & Company. They train them to work with different agencies. To date, they've helped dozens and dozens of digital marketing agencies free up their time to prioritize the money makers in their business, while Dot & Co. team actually ensures the client experience is smooth, very smooth. She's also the host of the Happy Clients podcast, where she interviews top names in the industry, diving deep into what makes clients happy. Taylor, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I know we've been internet friends for a while, but finally got to meet in real life this year. So very excited and honored to be on your podcast.
I'm excited too. And just start people off and tell people a little bit about Dot & Co. and what you do.
Yeah. So like you alluded to, we are all about happy clients. And how we got started was, this was kind of my zone of genius, you could call it. I had always worked in marketing. So I was a marketer at heart. So I understood the industry. But the pieces of running an agency that I really enjoyed, and that was talking to clients and building relationships, similar to you, Jeremy. I just love building relationships with people and talking and really helping agency owners. And so I'm kind of an accidental agency owner because it was something that I was super passionate about, which was account management. And it kind of just grew into a team of 50. Now we're a big agency and we're working with tons of other agencies. So I'm kind of an accidental agency owner, which we can get into. But in short, yeah, we work with agencies, really helping them free up their time. We come in, we actually manage their client relationships for them, build processes, project management, essentially own that entire experience. And our goal is for the agency owner to step away from that client facing seat, because you and I both know that if agency owners are working in their zone of genius and working on those money makers, their agency could look a lot different in 6 to 12 months. So we come in, take all that over, hopefully improve the experience, reduce churn, and allow agency owners to buy back some of their time.
Talk about in the beginning, the first kind of pivotal client that you had that launched you into this type of business.
It's so funny, right? Because like I said, it was accidental. And I just kind of went into this being like, this is what I'm doing now. And started talking to agency owners and saying, hey, yeah, I do account management. Like if you need help, let me know. And so I was at this event in Fiji, random, but I was at this agency accelerator event and I had signed up maybe like 9 months before. And by the time the event came around, I was thinking like, I don't really want to go to this. I don't want to run an agency anymore. I don't want to do this. I really don't know why I'm going to this event, but I already paid for it. So I was like, you know what, whatever, I'm going to go. So I show up halfway across the world at this agency accelerator event, and there was probably about 30 agency owners. And I kind of decided one day, I was chatting with my mentor at this event, and I was telling her essentially the same story as I told you, Jeremy. You know, I was like, I don't want to run an agency anymore. I really just want to do account management. Like that's just what lights me up. That gives me energy. And she was like, why don't you just do that? Like, just do account management, like see how you like it. It could turn into something big. And so I just kind of said, you know what? Yeah, I'm doing this. So I started telling everyone at this event, I was like, yeah, I do account management for agencies. If you need help, let me know. And there was this agency owner named Tom Breeze, who is an absolute gem. He runs an agency called Viewability, and
he's been on the podcast.
They're the top.
Yep.
Has he? Oh, okay. So he's amazing. And he runs one of the top YouTube agencies in the world. And so he and I got chatting. He was like, you know what? I actually need an account manager. Here's my situation. I'm totally strapped. I have small children. I just don't want to be, doing this anymore. But I don't know anybody I could hire. I haven't had success hiring this role before. And so I was like, well, you let me do it. And we kind of went back and forth, and he was like, you know what? I think this could work. And so I started working with him. I started to do kind of a fractional account management model. And then I started working with another agency owner. His name is Jason Portnoy. He is a superstar. He does a lot of e-commerce clients. And he was one of my other first clients. And so I started working in multiple agencies at the same time in like a fractional basis. And it just kind of took off. Like all these people started talking, and when they needed an account manager, they were reaching out. And at that point, when you're talking about the pivot, this is when I had to really think, okay, I can just do this myself. I'm very fulfilled. I love working in these agencies. I'm having a lot of fun. Or do I grow this into a team, right? Like, do I take this and replicate myself? Do I build this into what I think is an agency? And so we decided to go the team road. And I think it was 2 months later, hired my first account manager and just kind of started to build the frameworks, started to build the best practices, and started to sell this as a service. And over the last 5 years, we've kind of we're still doing the same thing. We're still doing outsourced account management. Obviously, we've gotten a lot better and better and better at our processes and how we work in agencies. But to this day, we're still offering the same premium service. And we've been able to cultivate a team of people who are very similar and love doing what we do.
At the event we were at, Taylor, you talked about the hiring process a bit, and you've honed in on that throughout the years. Can you talk about some of the mistakes that people make in the hiring process when hiring account managers specifically?
Yeah, I think account managers are a really unique breed. And I'll say that because I am one. But if you think of your agency, you have all these different roles. Maybe it's a media buyer, maybe it's admin, HR, accounting. But the account management function is the only piece of your agency that's like the touchy-feely side of business. It's the relationships, it's the feelings, it's the soft side. And so when you're hiring for this role, you have to take a unique approach. So you're not just looking for somebody who can do the job on paper or who is qualified. You need to make sure that this person hits every box, or else it doesn't work out. And I can confidently tell you that. They have to have the years of experience in digital marketing, or else it's going to take you years to actually train that person, because industry experience is so important. They have to have really strong written communication skills. And that's not something that I'm confident in teaching somebody from the ground up. Like if you don't come fully loaded and ready to roll in that area, it's really tricky to train. They have to have really great verbal communication skills and on-camera communication skills. That professionalism they have to really exude. And then they have to have this personality. They have to be equal parts friendly and bubbly, but serious and forward. Because our role is not just, we're not order takers. We have to have an element of strategic representation for both the client and the agency. We have to de-escalate situations that sometimes are really tricky. We have to deal with happy clients and we have to deal with angry clients. And so this person has to be a really unique person. And I think it should be a really slow hiring process. So personally, we hire exclusively account managers. So we've gotten really good at figuring out who's a good fit and not. And we use something called the DOT vibes, which you could use within your agency. But essentially, it's this feeling that you get when chatting with someone. And it's really hard to articulate, but it's not just all the qualifications that they have, but it's a feeling. And so that can be kind of tricky to train somebody how to hire for. But I would say the one piece of advice I would give if you're hiring for an account manager is to really take your time, have multiple people within your agency interview this person, and trust your gut. If you don't feel like it's if your gut says no, it's a no, and be very confident in that.
That's really helpful, Taylor. Actually, for this, I was watching, you did a great interview with Qasim Islam and Ralph Burns on the Perpetual Traffic podcast. And after hearing all of that, Qasim said, so you're looking for, how do you hire unicorns, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically what you're doing, because it's not easy to find this. Can you give me, do you remember a time, because you said, if one of these is not checked off, you're going to pay, essentially, where maybe everything was checked except for one thing, and you went with it anyways before you knew better?
Yeah, a lot of times, unfortunately, in the early days. There was the one that comes to mind. This individual on paper checked all the boxes, had the experience, had the personality, communication skills, verbal communication skills. But when push came to shove, they didn't actually have the digital marketing knowledge to speak to clients. And I put them in front of an agency and it went really bad. And it was such an expensive learning opportunity for me. But what I learned was that you can't just take something at face value. You really need to put people through tests and allow them to prove themselves. And honestly, that is really frustrating for the candidate to have to go through that process. However, I have allowed people to kind of slip through over the years, in the early years, when they didn't fully have the digital marketing knowledge, like the industry experience. And that is just something that takes so long to learn. And it's not something I can just put them through a digital marketing course. It's years in the industry. And so now I've realized, like, if they don't have that base knowledge and competence, it's not something that I'm able to train. Unfortunately, like, I really wish I could train someone from the ground up, but at the level that we're operating, we just simply can't. And I think that was a hard lesson to learn because I really wanted to be able to teach somebody from the ground up, but it's not easy and it's really expensive.
From a personality perspective, you know, the bubbly, nice personality, but serious and holds someone accountable personality. What kind of things do you use to assess that? Because, you know, probably some of your clients are on with maybe a hard charging CEO talking about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the person has to be nice, but they probably sometimes have to push back when they see someone not following whatever the strategy or methodology of that agency. So what do you use to assess personality, or how do how does that work in the interview process?
Yeah, we use like a bunch of different techniques, I guess. Like we're looking for little elements throughout the entire process. So it's not just like 3 questions you can ask. It's thread throughout the entire process, down to how quickly are you responding to us? How are you dealing with the difficult situations that we throw at you? How are you dealing with it's throughout the whole process, and it ties into that dot vibe. One of our core values is persistent. And so that is something that we're looking for, how a big piece of our role is quick to respond, professional, fully thought through, articulate, all of these things that our process allows for us to see through, the initial application to sending in videos of yourself, telling us why you'd be a great fit, through our training process, doing assessments on interview 1, on interview 2, we're looking for those things. So it's kind of one of these things that you have to push people and to see how far they push back. And that's just something you have to kind of thread throughout your process.
I know you have a hiring checklist somewhere on your website. I don't know if you want to point people to that. Where can they find that?
Yeah, we do have a hiring checklist. We have a client onboarding checklist that you can grab, but we have a hiring checklist. I can drop you the link. It's more or less just an understanding of what this role really should look like, what you need to make sure you have in place before you hire somebody. Something that I talked about at the Elevate event, Jason's event that you and I were recently at, was actually the cost to hire somebody. And I think most people don't realize how expensive an account manager costs to hire. So when you're thinking about this hiring checklist, also think about the cost. Like we spend around $10,000 to hire one account manager. And so if you're thinking about hiring, you do really need to think about that cost as well. And another thing to think about when it comes to the hiring checklist is time. We used to say it takes around 2 weeks, but it's closer to 4 to 6 weeks to really get an account manager hired, and then training after that. So I would allow yourself a lot of time. We have a full stack team who does hiring full time here at Dot. Because this role, like you said, is a unicorn role, it takes a lot more time than I wish it did. So as you're kind of preparing a checklist for your own agency, just consider the time that it really takes to find these people.
So Taylor, we go from hiring. Now someone or you bring them on. What are some key elements of the training that maybe before, again, you didn't realize how important some of them were early on, and now you know how important some of these pieces are from the training perspective?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we see is the person should be 80% there by the time they start working in your agency. They should understand marketing. They should check all those boxes, right? The other 20% needs to be best practices. So how do you want them to do account management within your agency? So when we start working with an agency, we really look at the holistic agency structure. So we go through our 4-pillar framework to really understand what's working well and where are the gaps. And then those are the things we need to hit first. But when it comes to training the account manager, those account managers need to learn how to go into an agency and identify what's working and what's not working, right? Because oftentimes we'll go into an agency and we're expected just to kind of fall to the systems that they have and fall to the expectations that the agency owner might set out. However, they're hiring us because we are the experts. So it's being able to step into an agency, look at what's going on and say, okay, that's cool that this is how it's been working, but here's our recommendation on how we should change this. And really being able to come fully loaded into an agency and make an impact quickly. So that's what we're training them on. It's kind of like the best practices of what we do at Dot, how we've identified things that work and don't work across agencies, and they need to kind of learn how they can arm themselves to kind of go have those conversations.
What's you referred to the 4-pillar framework.
Yeah.
What's that?
So we look at 4 key pieces of account management. It is agency structure. So in that pillar, we're looking at essentially how the nuts and bolts of the agency go together, communication, who goes to for what, who's responsible for what are everyone's KPIs, how are we tracking things, that kind of thing, kind of the setup. Then we're looking at onboarding. So to me, onboarding is the most important piece because this is when your client expects to get something, right? You've sold them. This is the point where they actually want to receive something for what they've invested in. So the whole onboarding process is really crucial. So we want to really understand, how are you currently onboarding agencies and how can we improve that process? The next pillar is project management. So a key piece of our role is managing the projects, ensuring that everything is running smoothly and nothing is falling through the cracks. And we are responsible at the end of the day for that client relationship. So we want to make sure that that is really buttoned up and that we're owning that process. And oftentimes, we might work with an agency where they use an Excel spreadsheet, and then we might work with an agency where they are fully built out and ClickUp. So we just want to understand that whole process. And the last is client retention. So we want to understand where are the holes, how do we fix them? How do we improve churn, reduce churn, and optimize the whole client experience? So in a nutshell, those 4 key components allow us to really understand what's going on in the agency and how we can kind of make some improvements. And that's kind of where we start.
I love that. Yeah. I'm going to start in reverse for a second from the client retention piece, because we were talking about before we hit record about reducing churn and what are some things that you've seen that help reduce client churn.
Yeah. Client churn is a huge topic, obviously, because if you have a leaky bucket, you can't scale your agency. A huge piece of the account management function within an agency should be responsible for churn. A lot of times, clients may leave because of the results. And as much as I would love to say, well, that's the fulfillment team's fault, at the end of the day, we're responsible for the client experience. So we need to kind of own that and improve that in future. But a lot of times it's misalignment in terms of expectations. It's the client doesn't feel heard. They don't feel like you understand their business. And a lot of that comes back to proper proactive communication, really spending time with that client, sitting down and really understanding what means success to that client. And so those are some of the key things that I would look for in an agency who is struggling with churn. Is how much time are you spending with your clients and what does that time look like and what are you doing with them? In terms of reducing churn, it's this whole user experience that we want to look at. Everything from client onboarding to offboarding and everything in between. But there's some elements that happen throughout the client journey that can allow you to really step up and get ahead of churn. So things like setting quarterly strategy calls with your clients, realigning on what the expectations are quarterly, but then kind of working back from that. Is it a monthly touch base? What are your weekly communications? What are your daily communications looking like? And ensuring that your team is providing the client with the handhold that they actually need. Because my thought process is, I don't know what you think, Jeremy, but as days go on while you're not communicating with your clients, they think you're doing nothing for them. And if you're not proactively communicating your value, then over time, the value diminishes and then they leave. So your team should be constantly looking for ways to wow them, show the value, and show how much value you're providing to the client. And a really strong account manager should be able to do that. And then some different strategies, things like de-escalation. We had a client that wanted to leave the other day, for example, and we got on the phone with him and we just kind of opened up the conversation and said, like, listen, I'm not here to try and save you as a client. I really just want to have an open conversation and really understand where we went wrong and how we can learn from this experience and how we can help you and your agency. And we kind of just allow them to have an open conversation with us. And through that experience, they were able to spill their guts of like, this is all the things that aren't working. And here's the misalignment and expectations. And we were able to successfully get aligned and continue working with that client because we were able to use the strategies of really just understanding them, understanding what's working, what's not working, and just realign. And instead of just allowing them to walk out the back door, we took the time to sit down with that client and really get on the same level. And so having those strategies as an account team are really crucial because there are going to be times when, even though you feel like you checked every box and you did everything you could throughout that relationship, there's going to be a time where someone wants to leave. And as long as you have the tools in your tool belt to really feel like you did all you could to save that relationship, not only will you impress the agency owner, but you'll keep that door open on a positive note for that client in the long term. And maybe that'll encourage referrals or the client might come back. So there's ways that you can really manage the relationship in a really meaningful way.
That's, Taylor, really helpful. I love that question. I don't know if you have any other, I don't know if we call it de-escalation questions. I think you have another awesome checklist on your hands if that's the case. But I love, where do we go wrong as a question. Are there any other questions that you or the team uses, for your clients while you're working on their behalf from like a de-escalation perspective?
That's a good question. Something that we use proactively is the one thing initiative. I don't know if we made this up or if it's like a thing in the industry, but something that we use is called the one thing initiative. And we'll just instead of giving our clients, these big surveys, well, this is a really easy thing you could do. You can have your account manager reach out to your clients frequently and say, what's one thing we're doing well? What's one thing we could do better? And what's one thing you want to see more of from us? It's a really easy way to get a gut check on how you're doing, what you could be doing better. It's not a huge lift for the client and it's just quick and easy, right? And if you have a really good relationship with your clients, they'll feel comfortable providing great feedback. It's easy and it allows you to really stay on top of things. Another thing that I recommend for account managers to have is a client dashboard that you use high level. You should know where your clients are at all times. You should know if they're happy, if they're at risk, if they're, green, yellow, red, and you should be able to back that up with something because as an agency owner, I want to be able to high level see where all my clients are at. So if you can kind of provide, high level for your agency owner, the health of the business, the health of the client roster, that is just the cherry on top.
You mentioned one of the pillars is the onboarding. And I know you also have a checklist for client onboarding. So we can point people to there. I'm not sure, they can obviously go to .andcompany.co. I'm not sure if there's a certain place they could find that, but I'd love for you to point out where they could find it, but also what's a element or two that you find to be, really essential in that client onboarding process.
Yeah. So you can go to .andcompany.co/checklist. This is a client onboarding checklist that we have given to agencies for, I think, 4 or 5 years now. And what I'll say about a checklist is great. It is a tool that you can use. But what I would say is it's not really about the tools and the processes. It's more about having the right person take the client through the journey. And the biggest mistake we see across most agencies is the sales team handover to account management and the expectations that are set in the sales process being handed over to the account manager. And there's oftentimes issues. So what I would say is the checklist is awesome. Have that in your process, in your project management software. However, you want to make sure that your account manager is responsible and taking the ownership for the entire client experience. And you want the account manager to be able to work with the sales team to bring that client through to have that really amazing experience for your clients. So I would say the checklist is like the tip of the mountain, but having the account strategy is everything underneath the water, the tip of the iceberg, I should say. And having the account manager is the whole package.
So Taylor, I'm sure you've seen this many times, and you've probably worked with agencies and probably gave them some tips on this, but what mistakes have you seen with the handoff from the sales to the account team?
It's expectation setting. It's always expectations. The sales team has a goal of getting the client to sign the agreement, and then that's it. And a really strong salesperson sees the long-term vision of the agency. They see the whole process. But sometimes you have salespeople who don't. And I think where the gap often happens is between sales and fulfillment. And account management obviously kind of oversees that whole process. But if the sales team understands the whole vision of the client experience, they can better speak to expectations with the client. So for example, we work with a fractional sales director, Corey. He owns Sales Haven. Absolutely amazing, totally crushing it. But what I love about him and his team is they understand the whole journey. They want to understand why clients are leaving on the other end. What is happening? Like they want to understand the full experience so that they can backtrack and really set expectations on the front end. And that is what I think a really strong sales team should be able to do. But at the end of the day, the account manager is responsible for ensuring that the expectations are aligned from the get-go. So oftentimes we encourage our account managers that if there are issues in that handoff, they feed those back to the sales team to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. But I'd say that's a huge gap that I see across most agencies.
Taylor, we're also talking about leveraging specialists, right? You obviously have a specific specialty in what you do. And I'd love to talk about leveraging specialists, agencies, and we work with a lot of agencies and we have a lot of agency partners as well, and we refer out versus in-house, right? Because someone's like thinking, no matter what type of agency, a company is thinking, well, I can leverage their specialty as an agency, or I can try and do this in-house. So speak to that for a second.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept because I think in today's age, we have access to so many more specialists than we ever had. And, we leverage specialists. Like I said, we work with fractional sales directors because I don't have the time or expertise to go train somebody to do this role, nor do I want to. And it's going to cost my business a lot more money. And on the flip side, for example, our team, agencies come to us because not only do they have an account manager and a project manager being placed in their agency, but they don't have to manage that person. We take care of the management of the account managers and the hiring and the training, which, as I said, costs a lot of money. So I think where we see agencies scale the fastest and see the most success, not only on the growth side, but on their margins, is when they leverage specialists rather than taking on the full-time hire and having to do all of that management and training themselves. I think if there's areas that you can outsource, it totally makes sense. Like even if you're a small or a big agency, you have to think about the trade-off of hiring somebody and training them and managing them yourself. Not to say it doesn't work, and it does, but people work with Rise 25 for their podcast because they don't want to have to train somebody to do all of the back end. And I can tell you it's a lot of work. Having people so that you can find specialists to buy back your time is literally the most important thing as you're growing a business. So I think if you can leverage specialists and it makes sense for your business, do it.
There was, Taylor, a company you worked with. I'd love to hear more details. It was a nonprofit marketing company, and what happened there.
Yeah. So we've been working with this agency for over 3 years, and he was actually quite reluctant to hire us because he had a full-time in-house account manager, but he'd heard great things about us. And so we kind of chatted, and he was really nervous, and we started working together. We put an account manager into his agency, and within 6 months, he came to us and he was like, I am saving over 60 hours a month. And now I'm able to go take an afternoon off and go smoke cigars in the backyard because that's what he's into. And he was able to just focus on the business instead of in the business. And he came to me and said, I love my team and everything. And, as we go through ups and downs in agency life, the last person that I would get rid of is my account manager with Dot & Co. And it wasn't just because she was doing an amazing job and saving him all this time. It was also the risk. He didn't have to have full-time staff members. He was able to outsource to a team like us. And it really took the risk off of him and his agency, which was a really great, it was a great win for him. And so those people, those agency owners who are able to leverage specialists and fractional models, I think it just is such a great opportunity.
Yeah. One of the things you talk about too in the onboarding and in the process from clients is client gifting. So I'd love to hear some of your favorite gifts you've seen people use or that you've used throughout the years.
Yeah, gifting should be a strategy, in my opinion. I don't think it should be something that's just like random. Obviously, there's going to be elements of random opportunities to surprise and delight a client, but it should be a little strategic. You should be looking for things. I actually sent a really cool gift to a client when I was an account manager. The agency owner came to me and they were like, hey, I want to send something really nice to this client. I don't know what. And so I started to kind of dig into, what are they into? We went layers deep, right? Trying to figure out what this person was into. They were really into vintage books, and they were really into baseball. So we sent them this vintage signed book from eBay that I went in the trenches and found and shipped it to their house. And they were floored. They couldn't believe that we A, found it, but B, thought to send them something so unique. And so obviously they're going to keep that, and they're always going to be reminded of that agency owner. And so I think that you have to have a budget for your account managers to be able to do this. So we give all of our account managers a quarterly budget, and spend it or you lose it. So you have to look for opportunities, and it shouldn't just be like a gift basket or some flowers, although I love that. But another example is like you said, I was on the Perpetual Traffic podcast a couple of years ago. So ahead of that podcast, I sent them custom cookies to their offices with their logo on it and my logo, and was just like, I'm so excited. The podcast is going to be awesome. And they, I think, still call me the cookie girl.
They did mention it on that episode as well.
Yeah. So they loved it. And it was just a little surprise and delight, just little opportunities that don't take that much effort. But when you do it, maybe you have your executive assistant send a nice gift, and it goes a long way.
So personalization obviously sticks out for me in those stories. Like, really, you researched it and you tried to make something that's highly personal.
Yeah, exactly. The more personal, the better. And don't just send your clients a hat with your business logo on it. Make it about them.
Taylor, you mentioned Fiji in the very beginning, and I'd love to hear, because it sounds like one of the reasons you went to the event is maybe a mentor. So I'd love to hear maybe some of your mentors throughout the years and maybe a lesson you learned from them.
Yeah. I've worked with a few different people throughout the years. And the biggest thing that I've learned is that you have to stay laser focused on what you're working towards. And in our industry, there's so many shiny objects. And for me, the first 3 years, I don't think I listened to any business podcasts. I didn't listen to books. I didn't want to get confused with what was out there. And that really allowed us to stay really laser focused on our offer and just getting better and better and better at what we were doing versus I'm very, I'm like a sponge. I like listen to other people's talks or presentations or podcasts. Like, I need to implement this now. I need to do this. Like, and I didn't want to give my team a whiplash and I didn't want to be all over the place. And I think that is the biggest lesson that I learned from mentors or anybody really is just to stay really focused on what you're doing until you hit a point where you can then look for other shiny objects.
Talk about working with a spouse. Someone may have be working with a family member or spouse and some of the things that you found that have helped.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, my husband and I both co-own our business together. I started it and he came in 3 years in, although he was there the whole time in the background, but wasn't full time in the business. Um, and it's been amazing. And I think why a lot of people go into business with partners is because they want to have that person, right, who's in it with them, who can bounce ideas off of, and who's really in it with you. And that has been us. Like we've been able to grow together and work through things together. You definitely have to have boundaries for sure in terms of your life and work, but I wouldn't have it any other way. It's been so good. And we have completely different skill sets that complement each other. And I don't think you'd ever have the level of trust with anybody other than maybe a business partner or a spouse or family member.
I'm sure that it helps. But talk about the boundaries for a second. It probably helps that you both kind of deal with different aspects of the business itself.
Yeah, we both have our lanes and we don't cross. But we just kind of have an open communication loop where it's like, if you don't want to talk about work, just say it and I won't be offended. Or if we're hanging out in the house and I say, like, can I ask you a quick business question? And if he says no, I'm like, okay, great, we'll talk about it later. Like we just kind of set that up where it's like, I'm not going to be mad and I have to respect you. So, and I thread this throughout our entire organization, but even though you think something's urgent, it's not that urgent. So like relax for a second. We're not saving babies. Let's just take a deep breath and we deal with it later.
Yeah. Taylor, I have one last question. Before I ask it, I just want to thank you for sharing your lessons and knowledge. It's been really valuable, and I want to encourage people to check out dotandcompany.co to learn more. And you can check out the dotandcompany.co/checklist for what Taylor was referring to earlier. I'd love to hear some of your favorite resources. It could be software, it could be podcasts, it could be books. And also, it's kind of like just a dual question. I'm going to ask you as a follow-up some of your favorite episodes on your podcast. But some of your favorite resources first could be podcasts, books, software.
So my favorite book that I recently read is called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. He's actually from the East Coast of Canada, where I'm from. And I recently read it, and I think it's my favorite business book I've ever read. It's the most practical, laser-focused book I've ever read. So highly recommend that. On my podcast, we talk a lot about account management, of course. But our hiring process we go into in a deep level and what we look for. So I would recommend listening to that. And yeah, I would say that would probably be the best one.
It looks like you have an episode with Todd Tasky, so I've not seen that one. I'll watch that one. Also with Corey Quinn as well.
Yeah.
So both of them in the podcast are both good guests. So I'll have to check those out. But Taylor, I'd want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing. Everyone check out dotandcompany.co to learn more and more episodes of the podcast. And we'll see everyone next time. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.